Okay, everyone, good morning. Welcome back. Yeah, we just have about 5 minutes until class time. So for now, just get comfortable, and it's good to see you guys again. Hope you had a good weekend and enjoyed the little extra time off. Hello, hi, good Katan, good morning. Hi, Leo, good morning. Hey, Leah and Sebastian, Mia, Sergio, good to see you guys. Just trying to find another notebook that I have here. Good morning, everybody. Hello, hello, hi. Alexis, Jesus, Paula, Malia, Melanie, Eamon, and hey, Justin. Good morning, Celine. Hopefully you've had a pretty good weekend and a good start to the day as we get back into our lectures here. Good morning, Jerry. Hi, Brittany. Good morning. Hey, Kobe and Angel. Welcome back. Hey, Sophia. Hey there, Kevin. PG. PG. Hi, Alessandra. Good morning, Cameron. Peach is right there, so I'm trying to see if she wants to come up. Hello, everybody. Oh, Peachy says hello. Big Peach. So, just another minute. Just waiting until I get to 10 a.m. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome back. Hi, Jocelyn, Allison, Ivan, Jason, Nathan, Shelly, Kenny. Good to see you guys again. Peachy. Okay, well, it's pretty much 10 a.m., so I'm going to let us get started again. Yeah, Alessandra, I don't know if they have a group chat established or not, but I'm sure you guys can work that one out if you like. But anyway, yeah, welcome back, guys. Thanks again so much for your attendance. Today, I just want to start off by asking one quick question. Did some of you happen to notice Sunday night the message that I sent through Titanium? Let me know if anyone can confirm, and then if so, I'll talk a little bit about that. So yeah, let me know. Well, Ivan, have you looked at your emails? I'm asking for someone to confirm. Please, if anyone can. Good morning. Okay, Sophia, yes, you've gotten it. So Ivan, you got to look at your inbox. Make sure to follow your announcements from school because if anybody got it, then everybody got it because it's just a class-wide announcement through Titanium. Okay, good. So making sure it was delivered properly and I don't have to resend it. So then in that case, yeah, let's just talk about it a little bit. That's the first essay prompts. And as mentioned there in the prompt, sorry, I'm going to pull it up right now so I can look at it myself. Yeah, so it's due Thursday, Thursday, March 4th. And it's a 3 to 4 page double-spaced essay. So what I'm going to do first today is just kind of open with some basic comment and discussion of the essay prompt so you know like how to get started and what it's all about and what the basic parameters are. So if that sounds good, let's just start with that. And by the way, again, anybody who hasn't yet seen the email, do make sure that you look in your school emails for Cal State Fullerton. That's where Titanium messages are delivered to each student of the class. Okay, so what it says here in the document, I'm just looking at it, it says you must write a 3 to 4 page double-spaced essay on one of the topics below in 12-point font with normal margins. Okay. Angel, you ask, do we type the question we're answering or just put the number on the title? You don't need to do either one. Yeah, so it's no need for that because it'll be clear just by the content of your essay which prompt you chose to write on. So it's not like you have to create a header at the top which says, you know, you write out the prompt again and the questions that it asks. Just start writing the first paragraph on the first line. You don't have to say, this is in response to prompt 1. Okay, right. So yeah, it says you must write a 3 to 4 page essay double-spaced on one of the topics below in 12-point font with normal margins. So let me just kind of explain some of the parameters of that just format guideline. It's 3 to 4 pages. Now, with the page length requirement, if you feel that you're rushing to complete it at the end of the 4th page and you still have more to say, I don't want you to feel like you're cut off. So it's okay to go over and beyond the maximum page length guideline. So if you need to go extend the paper beyond 4 pages and move into the 5th or even 6th page, that's okay. So think of the upper boundary as it's flexible, and it's okay to move and write a little more than that. Although I would say if you continue beyond like 6 pages or so, then in that case it's maybe getting a little too long and it's starting to approach like a term paper length, which this is not intended to be of that length. Therefore, 3 to 4 pages is a basic guideline, but if you need a few additional pages beyond 4, that's also fine. Okay, now on the lower boundary though, 3 pages, that is not so flexible. So you can't, I don't think, write a successful essay if you didn't even get to the 3-page mark. So then it would not have enough information. I don't think you would have enough analysis or be detailed enough. So basically with a 3 to 4 page length requirement, the upper boundary is flexible and you can go beyond it, but the lower boundary is a little more hard and it would be unwise to write a shorter paper than 3 pages. Now it's double spaced, not single spaced, but also not anything bigger than double spaced. So having been a professor for so many years and you see so many essays that are submitted to you, you got to imagine, right, that you see everything under the sun when it comes to student work. Like sometimes some students lacking confidence in their ability to write to the full page requirement will do things like create spacing that is bigger than it ought to be so that there's more blank space and less text. So I don't want you to do that. You can't do that. You have to make it just normal double spaced. Also, it's 12-point font. So don't use a different font. Like don't make the font too big. If it's bigger than 12 points, then obviously you can't write as many letters and sentences in the same space of pages. So it's got to be 12-point font. And the margins should be normal default margins. Don't expand the margins to shrink the body of the text in the center of the page and make it smaller than it ought to be. Just use the same default margins on your word processor, probably Microsoft Word for most of you. All I'm saying is you can't play any games with the way the format is. You can't like have a bunch of big spaces, giant margins, huge font, and then call that, you know, satisfactory. It's got to just be normal. So 12-point font, default margins, double spaced, okay, and 3 to 4 pages. Also, I'd say this, for your front page of the paper, like the first page, I prefer it when people don't have an excessively detailed header with like 10 items of information. So you know what I'm talking about. Like if a person said their name, the date, the name of the class, their student ID number, height, age, weight, you know, finally we get 3/4 of the way down the page and this is the first page, and that's not a page of writing. Okay, so either keep the header very minimal, just name, date, essay title in normal font, or if you want to include all the additional information, then that's your option. But in that case, you have to create a separate title page. And on the first page of writing, it just starts at the top with your first paragraph. Okay, so those are 2 options for the header on the front page. If you want to include a lot of information, then just create a separate title page. And if you just want to keep it minimalist, then don't put a lot of information and just start the paper close to the top of the first page. With the title of the paper, don't expand and write a giant font. I don't want you to have 20-point font, essay number 1, philosophy of religion, because that occupies too much space also. I'm saying all this because I want it to be 3 to 4 pages of actual content writing, not just, you know, title and date and stuff like that. Okay, so just know that. Okay, it's due on Thursday, the 4th of March. So that's 2 weeks from this Thursday. That's 16 days from now. So you actually have a pretty good amount of time to work on it. After we finish the lectures this Thursday, you'll have all the material done that you need for either topic, okay? Header, name, essay title. Yeah, that would be fine. Sometimes I think it's good to include the date. Malia, you retracted your message. I thought I was speaking to your comment, but yeah, either way, yes, you just want to have a very minimalist header on the top with a minimum of information, just your name, maybe the date, and then the title, but in a normal font. Okay, and it's due on Thursday the 4th. Importantly, of course, you cannot consult any electronic resources whatsoever. That's what it also says in the prompt. You can't use the internet at all. So you're not permitted to use any materials outside of what I've given you in the class. So, oh, okay, that's no worries. Thanks, Malia. Yeah, as I was saying, you cannot use anything off of the internet. So you have to just use your actual physical textbook, this book, and your notes, and whatever combination of those notes, your common sense, and the book that you have. But you can't take any additional information from the wide world of the internet. These arguments are, in many cases, thousands of years old. And yeah, we'll get to that, Aaliyah. I'll talk to you about quotes in just a minute, not to worry. But what I was going to say is that these essays and arguments have existed for so long, and there's definitely tons of information about all types of analysis and comment on all of them online. But I'm not interested in what any of those people have ever said about these arguments. I only want to know what you have to say about them in combination with the book that I assigned to you and the notes that you've been taking in the class. So no, you can't use the internet, and you know that's very important because it's ruled out by the policies of this paper. It's not hard at all for the professor to determine or to detect if there was information taken from an unapproved source. So please don't even try to do that. Think of your computer as, it's not a computer, it's a typewriter. And there's no such thing as the internet because this is the year 1950. There's no such thing even as a computer or the internet. There's just books, typewriters, and classes that you take based on the books that you were given by professors in school, like we did for thousands of years. I'm a big fan of the internet, but that's not what I want you guys to study. I want you to study the book that I gave you. So that's just something I'm mentioning right now to be very clear. Now, you may, and you probably should, and now we get to your question, Aaliyah, you should include some quotes from the book at times in your paper as support for your analysis. So when you do that, here's the just basic convention I want you to have. Any direct quotes, enclose them inside of quotation marks. So when you put like a quote verbatim from the book, just put quote marks around the quote. And then at the end of the quoted passage, just inside of the parentheses, enclose the page number from the book where you found the quote. So I'm just asking you to give me a parenthetical page number citation for any direct quotes when you put them in your paper. And that's it. You don't have to have a separate bibliography or works cited page. Those would only be needed in case you were really writing a term paper that was a research paper, because in that case, the professor wants to know, where did you get all of your research resources from? Are some of these from books, articles, or what? Well, in this class, you're only really allowed to use the one textbook, so it would be, I think, just a waste of paper and energy to have everyone write a works cited that says, hey, here's the textbook, and this is what it's called, because we know what the textbook is. So the only rule is when you're citing from quotes of the book, just use quote marks and the page number in parentheses. The only other case of citation would be if you have a very close paraphrase to some of the language in the book, but it's not exactly word for word identical. If you're concerned that you're borrowing a lot of the material from the book but not quite quoting it, you could also just put a parenthetical page number citation for the close paraphrase passage, and that would be a fine way of signaling credit to the author of the book. Okay, so that's just the rules for citation of evidence from the book. Use quotes, place the page number in parentheses at the end of any quoted or closely paraphrased passage, and other than that, there's no need for a works cited or a bibliography separate. Okay. So far, are we all good? And feel free at any point if there's something that I didn't mention or that you need me to clarify, you can just jump into the chat and let me know. Okay, so anyway, the essay is worth 15% of your total grade basis. This is the first of our 4 things in the class. You're going to have later on the midterm, of course, and then the second essay to follow that, and then the final exam, but we're getting started with this first essay. Now, the topic of the essay is philosophy of religion, and you have 2 options. Don't report on both of the prompts. Just pick one of the 2. That's another thing that there have been at least a couple of cases in the past where a student failed to note that you're only supposed to pick one. And in case a student writes on both of them, that produces a very awkward essay, because you try to cram everything into, if you try to cram both of these topics into a 3 or 4 page space, it would definitely not be detailed enough. At the same time, I'm not asking you to report on everything, just one of the prompts. So it'd sort of both be too much and not enough. So just don't do that. That's easy to avoid. Pick the one prompt that you like and ignore the other one. Whichever one of the 2 that you thought was more interesting or that you understood better, choose that one, write on it, and not the other one. Okay, minimum requirement for quotes? No, not necessarily a minimum requirement, but like I was saying, I do think that it's a good idea to have some quotes at points throughout your essay. So, in presenting the arguments of the author, you might choose to include like a key quote to go along with your just plain spoken description of the argument in your own words. There's no minimum requirement, but I mean, well, there's 2 authors and 2 objections to each author. So you'll do as you see fit with regards to citing the various authors, but to include a quote or so from at least the 2 main arguments would probably be a good idea. Okay, so then we have 2 prompts. So the choice between the 2 prompts is basically whether you would like to compare and contrast the ontological argument in Pascal's wager, or the other option, if you want to compare and contrast the cosmological argument and the argument from design. So the nature of the 2 essays is that it's a comparison and a contrast between 2 classical arguments for God's existence, and you just get to pick which of the 2 that you'd rather speak to. If it's the ontological in Pascal, then you'll do prompt 1. And if you'd rather report on the cosmological argument and the design argument, then you would pick prompt 2. So let me read the first prompt and just say a few basic things further about it. It says, prompt number 1, discuss the ontological argument and Pascal's wager and provide 2 objections to each. So let me break that down a little bit. The ontological argument from, classical philosopher and theologian Saint Anselm. This is the one that said God is universally defined as the greatest conceivable being. And so based on this definition, according to the author's argument, he must exist in the mind and in reality, because this is greater than just to exist in the mind. And if God only existed in the mind, then he wouldn't be the greatest conceivable being, but that would contradict the definition, so he must exist in both. We've gone over that a lot, but that's just a very brief breakdown of the argument again, just to remind you. Pascal's wager. We closed class last Thursday by talking about Pascal's wager. That's the argument given by the French philosopher Blaise Pascal. And what he said was that it's just a safer idea, or better idea, for you to believe in God rather than not believing in him. Because although we could never prove whether he exists or not, he's very direct on that point. There's no way to prove it, because God is way beyond our knowledge and comprehension if he does exist. So he says never can one prove or disprove his existence, but you have to choose nonetheless whether you believe in him or not. And so it puts you in a position of like making a wager on the question whether God exists. He compares the wager to like a coin flip. And the similarity would be that in a coin flip, you don't know which side it will be, but you know it's got to be one or the other. Well, with God, we don't know, he says, whether he exists or not, and we can't know. But we know that he either does or doesn't. So we have to wager on this. And then he just says, evaluate the possible costs and benefits of wagering on either side. If you wager that God exists, you basically choose to believe he exists, then there's only possible benefit and no possible loss. If you're correct and he is real, then the argument goes you would go to heaven. If you're wrong and he doesn't exist, then so what? You don't really suffer or lose anything. You just, there's no punishment, so there's no God. That's not a real loss of any significant quantity. On the other hand, if you don't believe in God, then assuming you're wrong and he does exist, then I guess you'd either not go to heaven or even worse, go to hell, which would be the worst thing possible. And if you didn't believe in God and you're correct, we could say you're right, but there wouldn't really be any benefit to having been correct. I guess you might have had some more time in life, not focused on religion, but it's not really a great benefit. So that's why Pascal says it's better to believe than not to believe, because it's all risk against no reward when you don't believe, and it's all possible upside against no risk when you do believe. Given that you have to choose one or the other, he says it's better to wager that he exists. So anyway, that's just my summary of the two arguments, but the prompt also asks you to give 2 objections to each, right? So that's a total of 4 objections, 2 to the ontological argument and 2 to Pascal's wager. So with the ontological argument, we mentioned 3 different objections at least. There was Gaunilo, the lost island objection. Then there was G.E. Moore, the existence is not a predicate response. And then there was William Rowe, and the whole point that you can't just define something as existing and then claim to have really proven it. And he gives the example of magic hand and other related examples that I mentioned in the lecture to sort of back up his objection there. So anyway, those are 3 different objections. You only have to choose 2 of those to report on if you're doing this prompt. And then Pascal's wager, there are objections to him as well. We're going to get into those today. So the objections to Pascal are part of the plan for today's lesson. So hold off, and I'll certainly go into a lot of depth on that as we follow today's meeting. Anyway, the last part of the prompt is where the student would then give their own kind of free response as to which of the 2 arguments did you find to be the better argument. So what you're being asked is, was the ontological argument or Pascal's wager the better argument between the 2? Better meaning more persuasive to you, more compelling, more plausible. Like, which argument did a better job at making the case for believing in God? And based on which one you thought was the more persuasive, rational, compelling, you'll tell me that, and then you'll give the reasons why. When you defend your choice as to what was the better argument, you have to give like a philosophically insightful reason. You can't just say something random like, well, Anselm's name starts with A and so does mine, and that's why I liked him better. I mean, that would not be a reason to find his argument more compelling. So you really have to get into the nuts and bolts of why you thought whichever one it was, that argument was the superior argument compared to the other one. On the other hand, some students will have a different reaction and say, I couldn't pick a winner. To me, neither of these arguments was the clear winner in terms of which one was better. And if you don't think you can judge which one is better, then okay, you're also going to have to then justify and explain that response. Okay, so either you're going to see one of them as better than the other, and if so, you tell me which one and you tell me why. If you do not think that one of them was better than the other, that's okay. Then just tell me why you do not find one better than the other, why they're equally weak or equally deficient or something, and then explain and justify that reaction. Okay, so that's the full rundown on prompt 1. You present the 2 arguments and you give full detail on how they reach their conclusion. You can utilize quotes and notes that you've taken on this material. Then you state the different objections to the 2 arguments, right? 2 to each one. And then finally, in closing, you'll tell me which of the arguments was better, if either, and why. And if neither one was better, then why not? Okay, so that's prompt 1. Now let me make a mention about style guidelines while we're on the topic before I say a few brief things about prompt number 2. So stylistically, when you're writing papers in philosophy, the genre of writing the aesthetic you're going for, it's not like the big poetic, figurative language of the novelist or the poet. So you're better served thinking of it this way. The way that philosopher is written, especially in the current day, is closer to the aesthetic of like cold, clinical, legalistic. Like you're just presenting almost like a legal brief of an argument towards a certain conclusion, and you're weighing the evidence on either side of whether this is a good or a bad argument. So you want to kind of just be direct, straightforward, clear, concise. Don't try to, bewilder the professor with your poetic command of English diction. Instead, just think of it as I'm making a case for something, and I'm trying to do it in the most straightforward and direct way possible. To that end, I would add this as another point of style. In most of the classes that you've taken through your life so far, writing essays, you've been asked to write them in English classes a lot of times. And in those classes, oftentimes they will emphasize the format of the standard English essay. So they say things to you like this: make sure you have a clear thesis statement in your intro paragraph, and then have some body paragraphs which attack the thesis. And then finally, you have a conclusion paragraph where you summarize what has happened in the paper and you close it out. Well, that's all well and good when you're basically being taught how to structure an English essay. But in a philosophy class, the only thing that we really care about are the body paragraphs, the analysis itself. So all the stage setting, like here's what I'm about to say, and then in closing, this is what I just said, that's not as important as really the nitty-gritty of the body paragraphs themselves. So I often will say this to students: it's okay for you to either completely eliminate or just cut short your intro and conclusion. You can make them very brief and to the point. Like this is an essay which discusses the cosmological argument and the argument from design. I'm going to tell you which one I thought was the better argument, and I'm going to also discuss two objections to each. And you just move on from there. It would be better to have something like that than to say, God and man is so deep and timeless. This is an eternal question that has puzzled the minds of generations. And here it is, 2021. The world is a more diverse and, vital place than ever. And now as we debate these questions, we enter into the life of the philosopher. Getting into all of that kind of extra poetic kind of fancy talk is not going to show me that you actually understood and comprehended the content of the arguments themselves. So I'm telling you, you can really just have your first statement in the first sentence of the paper, like Anselm's ontological argument tries to prove that gods exist, and here's how it goes. And you just start analyzing the argument directly. So I'm telling you, basically, skip the formalities. No need for an intro paragraph. No need for a thesis statement or a conclusion. Just a bunch of good body paragraphs. And when you've answered every question in the prompt, then you can just stop and you're done. And that's a good thing. Now, Angel, I see you've asked me here, when we discuss which argument is better, are we allowed to use the word I? Yes, good question. Definitely use I. In philosophy, there's no at all rule that says you cannot use the first person. I know a lot of times you've heard it said that you have to use the impersonal third person present tense. Like one believes that the cosmological argument is superior because in the judgment of one, you don't have to say that. Just refer to yourself and that's fine. So I found this to be the better argument, in my opinion, and here's why, etc. Okay, so good question. No worries about I. Short answer, yes, you can use that, and it's actually almost encouraged. Okay, so we've covered everything I wanted to say about all the things except for second prompt. Yeah, so Gloria, oftentimes I get that question that you're asking. Is this MLA, is this APA? I feel like that's a little bit overdone, really, the way that they always talk to you guys about this. To me, I'm a published author, and I really don't even have any idea what either one is. So just follow the basic format guidelines that you see here in the prompt, and that'll be enough, okay? Double-spaced, 12-point font, normal margins, 3 to 4 pages. At the first line of each paragraph, you indent the line. I don't think that is relative to MLA or APA. So just indent the first line of each paragraph and follow the other format guidelines. Okay, so Gloria, does this make sense to you? It's neither one. I don't even know what the words APA and MLA, American something, blah, blah, blah. I don't even know what they stand for. So I wouldn't tell you APA or MLA. I'm just saying 12-point font, double space, normal margins, 3 to 4 pages. And all the other things I've said about citations, follow that as well. Just give me the quote in quotation marks with the page number in parentheses. And I think that's all I can say. Okay, no problem. So, are we good on that? So the second prompt, I'll just say a few brief things. The second prompt is just like the first. The only difference is that you could report on the two other arguments if you wanted. So the second prompt is cosmological argument versus the argument from design. By now we know kind of what those are. The cosmological argument is the one that says everything has to have a cause, and the universe is something that exists, so it has to have a cause, so it has to be something that's not dependent on anything else. Therefore, the first cause is a necessary being. There's more detail in there. There's the principle of sufficient reason. There's the sphere example. There's contingent versus necessary truths. The idea that an infinite regress is impossible. But you would fill in all those details if you reported on this. Okay, the design argument is the one about if a thing exists and it has a purpose, a function, and detailed assembly of parts, then it had to have an intelligent creator. And that is given by the example of a watch being found in the woods. From there, the author generalizes to the point that in nature there are many things that also have a purpose, function, and complexity. And so wouldn't it be true that those have to have an intelligent designer as well, that they couldn't happen randomly because a watch could not happen randomly. Okay, and then 2 objections to each. Now, for the objections to the cosmological and design argument, the best place that you'll find those would be in the article by Ernest Nagel, Does God Exist? Because he provides a whole set of objections to various classic arguments for God's existence. And so you'd find him commenting on the cosmological argument and the argument from design there. And again, as before, the prompt finishes by asking you to tell me, is one of these a better argument? If so, which one and why? And if you don't think one is better, then okay, why not? And that's the second prompt. Okay, so that's about it. For now anyway, I can't think of much else to say about these. But are we all clear, guys? If so, let me get some feedback from you here in the chat. I know that you guys are trying to set up like a group chat or whatever, but can you hear me and do you know what I'm saying? Like, do you have any other questions about these prompts for now, or are we all on the same page? It's okay if further questions pop up and you think about them after this meeting, that's okay. You can email me and we can talk about them any other time, or you can come to office hours. But you have 16 days to work on them. It's plenty of time starting now. But this week we do have some key lectures if you're thinking of reporting on either prompt actually, because, well, at least on the first prompt, we need objections to Pascal, and that's what we're going to get into today. Okay, perfect, guys, thanks. So let's resume our meeting schedule. I believe last time we had wrapped up the discussion of Pascal's wager. So, I think I even kind of briefly summarized it again just now. Does anybody have any memories about what Pascal's wager is saying and how it's trying to make the case that you should just believe in God? Why does Pascal's wager say the better bet, the better wager or whatever, is to believe instead of to not believe? Just kind of get us back into that topic for a minute, and then we'll go from there. What reason does Pascal give you to choose to believe in God? What's the reason that he says, I'm suggesting this? Okay, Kobe, it's safer for someone to believe in God and God not being real than not believe in God and him being real. Okay, cool. I guess I see what you say when you say that. But it's sort of like the way you present it is, what if you're wrong when you make this choice? It's not as bad as if you're wrong when you make the other choice. But that's only getting like half of the story, because you could be right in either bet as well. You know what I'm saying? So like, you could say, for example, that the reward associated with being right in the one case is immeasurably great, but the reward with being right in the other case means nothing. So you have to kind of make a statement that's more fulsome than that. You have to talk about the comparative benefits and costs that could happen on either side of the bet. So in choosing to believe, there's one possible way of winning and one possible way of losing. Maybe God exists, and if he does, you're going to go to heaven. And if he doesn't, then nothing happens. On the other hand, if you choose not to believe in God, then again, given that we don't know which outcome it will be, you could either be right or you could be wrong. If you're right when you don't believe, you really stand to gain nothing. And if you choose to not believe but you're wrong, then as you've said, correct, yes, then in that case you're either denied the rewards of heaven or even punished with hell. So he says, if you don't know which side is going to be the outcome, whether he exists or not, why would you choose not to believe if this holds out the possibility for great loss and no real reward? Whereas to believe holds out no possibility of significant loss, and instead the possibility anyway of a great reward. So one bet is all upside with no downside, and the other is all downside with no upside. So given that there's two options for you, why choose the one that is all risk with no gain against one where it's all possible gain against no risk? Okay, yeah, and so Leo, you don't really lose anything if you believe in God and he doesn't exist, yet you get eternity if he does, yeah. Mark, it's better to believe because you risk going to hell when you don't, and you risk almost nothing when you do. Also good. Okay, fair enough. These are all, I think, on the right lines. So we now need to understand what are some objections to this stuff, to what Pascal has argued. And in the book, there's at least two authors that we can use as possible objections to Pascal. So one of them is this man, and his name is W.K. Clifford. Okay, W.K. Clifford, British philosopher of the 19th century. This paper is called The Ethics of Belief. I'm just trying to open to his pages here. Yeah, so he lived actually quite short life, 1845 to 1879. So he wasn't even 35 when he passed away, but he was well respected in his short life as a mathematician and a philosopher, and he was made a fellow of the Royal Society of London in 1874 at a young age of 29. So he was a prodigious talent and an intellect, and he wrote this paper in 1877 that we're now going to try and look at. It's called The Ethics of Belief. So, just as I usually try to start off, the new author, giving you his name, the dates of his life, the title of the publication we're reading, and the date it was published. W.K. Clifford, this is initials for William Kingdon, but I think that he was known informally in his life as W.K. So the title is The Ethics of Belief. The word ethics is a word we're actually going to learn a lot more about next week as we start that as a second topic in the class. But as a preview of that, ethics is the theoretical study of morality and moral concepts. So it's all about stuff like right and wrong, good and bad, and all of that. So the title then is this: what is the rights and wrongs, morally speaking, of how we form our beliefs? Is there a way of forming beliefs that is immoral and wrong? W.K. Clifford is going to make the case that actually, yes, if you form your belief without any consideration of the evidence and you just go off of what you hope is true, then that's not the right way to do it when you form beliefs, and that he thinks is wrong. And in the end, that's going to sort of function as his pushback to Pascal, because Pascal says, I want you to choose to believe in God even though there's no proof I could give you and it can't be proven. But just believe because of the hoped for outcome of being right. Clifford is here to tell you that that's not the right reason to believe anything. Just believe it because you hope you're right in the end, not because you really have evidence that it's true. He says the only good reason to believe anything is if you have solid evidence to justify the belief. But if you don't have that evidence, then you shouldn't prejudge the matter and believe on something without any sufficient basis. Okay, so like that's the big picture of his argument, but we're going to get into the details now. Okay, so what really drives Clifford's essay throughout is this example that he starts off with. Yet again, the philosopher provides a hypothetical scenario to consider, and so here's a new one. Clifford wants you to think of the case of the person who owns a ship owner. So let me just label this as the ship owner scenario. Okay, so my artistic skills are somewhat lacking, but just we do our best. Here's the ship owner. Okay, this guy owns a ship. Here's the ship. So you can see here is the ship and there's the owner, but there's some problems with the ship though. Basically, this ship that he owns is in terrible condition. So I'm going to try and make that look like so. Cracks, leaks, things are just breaking down all throughout the ship. The hull has multiple cracks in it, and there's holes in the ship. It's got damage all around. Okay, it's just in poor condition, this ship. So much so that if you allow it to sail again, because right now it's just docked in the harbor, right? But if you allowed this ship to actually go out into the water, the very likely thing that would happen is it would just sink because of how badly beat up and decrepit it is. Okay, now the ship owner, this guy, it's his ship, so he knows that it's in bad shape. He, of all people, knows this 100%. It's like a person owns a car. If they pay attention to what's going on with their car, then they would be the first person to tell you or know exactly what kind of condition it's in. And so he's not unaware of this, is what I'm telling you. He's fully aware that the ship is in bad condition and likely to sink if it was ever allowed off the dock and out into the water again. Okay, so first thing is there's a guy with a ship. It's in really broken down condition, and he knows that. But here's the thing. Let's imagine that the ship owner, he really wants to allow the ship to just take one more venture. Maybe it's like a cargo ship, and if he allows it to take this one more journey, he could possibly make some money off of the completed route, the venture of like delivering cargo and returning the ship back. So, okay, here's our ship owner's mind state. He knows this ship is very likely, based on the evidence that he has, to sink, to just sink to the bottom of the ocean if he allows it to go out. But on the other hand, he has this hope that it can work out one more time. This hope that it will maybe come back safely if he allows it to sail again. It's not based on anything other than hope. It's not based on evidence, because what does the evidence clearly show that he already knows about? The evidence that is before him is that the ship is not safe, and in no way is it likely to return safely back. But he wants to believe that it will. He hopes that it will, and he wants that to be the case. So let's just suppose that our ship owner convinces himself, against all the evidence, that it can make just one more journey. Just let's let it sail one more time, because I think it'll make it back. Why do I think this? Like, I'm speaking as a ship owner. Why do I think it'll make it back? I don't know. It's wishful thinking, isn't it? I wish it will. I hope it will. So I'm going to believe this just because I hope so. Okay. So you follow me so far? I hope that much of the story is kind of making sense. You got a ship owner with a ship. It's bad condition. He knows this, but he hopes that it can make one more journey. And just based on the hope and the wish alone, he decides, okay, I'm going to let this happen. I'm going to do it. So he lets the ship sail out. Now, there's two possible alternative endings to the scenario. Okay, so let me walk you through the two possible versions of our choose your own adventure story, kind of. All right. Well, so version one, he lets the ship sail, and wouldn't you know it, it does sink. It completely sinks, and all the cargo and the people that were on the boat are just lost in the sea. So that's not good. Now, if the ship does sink like that, tell me, would you say it would be fair to say that our ship owner did something wrong? That it was wrong for him to let it sail? So you heard my question, like, if he lets it sail, knowing full well how bad and dangerous it was, and then it sinks, would we place blame on him for that? I would say, yeah. Correct, Kobe. It's not something to overthink, right? I mean, but let's overthink it a little bit. Why is it that he did do something wrong? And it's fair to place blame on him for this morally, like, shame on you, that was wrong. Why is it okay to say this? What makes that a justified reaction? Now we know, yes, that he did wrong, but what's the reason you'd say that he did wrong? How come he can't say, hey, like, don't be mad at me? Well, because he could have prevented the event, right, Jerry? And why is it upsetting on a moral basis that he didn't do it? Well, he could have prevented the event. I'm even fishing for like a little more of a deep reason on this, but you're saying something true. How come he could have prevented it? Because good, Angel, because he knew of its poor condition. That's the main thing. He can't plead ignorance. He can't be like, oh my God, the ship sunk? No way. In 100 years, I would think it would sink. He can't say that because, as I tried to emphasize, he was totally, completely certain about it being in bad condition, likely to sink. So the reason it's fair to place blame on him is because he knew he was putting these people at risk by letting the ship sail, and he allowed it to sail anyway, totally against the evidence, just because he hoped that it would all work out, So doesn't he deserve a measure of blame at least? Yeah, because people have died. Who's to blame because of this bad outcome? Well, the person who knowingly sent it out, completely aware of the dangers involved. So if it sinks, basically, here's the takeaway. This guy did something wrong then, because obviously he let it sail, knowing of the risks, and now we see the damage that was done. Let me give you the other version of the story. suppose that in another way of things turning out, he lets it sail, same ship, same damage, same foreknowledge of how badly damaged it is. But suppose that in another case, just by chance and luck, somehow he's fortunate and it doesn't sink, and it actually does complete its full route and comes back with no damage and no loss. Now, in that way of the case playing out, I guess it was no harm in the end. But do you say that he didn't do anything wrong if that's how it worked out? So it just depends on whether the ship sinks or not, whether his initial decision was right or wrong? Let me know. Was it still wrong or not wrong in the version of the case where the ship somehow makes it through? Was it wrong for him to allow it to sail if in the end it somehow worked out? Did that eliminate the wrongness of the choice to let it sail? Okay, Kobe, you say, he still risked the lives of the people on the ship. Yeah, he did, right? Because he didn't know that it would come back safely. He just hoped that it would, and he, I guess, believed that it would based on the hope. But even if it works out in his favor, it's still wrong because we can't excuse his bad decision-making based on the luck that good fortune shined down on him somehow, you see? So you guys all seem to get the right answer, that it was still wrong. Now, to give you a more modern example, because I mean this is written in 1877, so people didn't have cars, right? Nowadays, I can think of a case that's very similar to this, which I hope would arouse the same kind of response from you. Think of a case where someone is way too drunk to drive, okay? And they know they're that drunk. Maybe they're at a party and someone's got a breathalyzer and they're like, hey, blow into this. Let's see how drunk you are. And they're blowing out like a 0.2, just outrageously drunk, staggering, slurring their words and speech. And someone tells them, you probably shouldn't drive. And they're like, yeah, I know, I'm totally gone right now. But, I believe maybe I could make it. I mean, I know that when people are as drunk as I am, they get into accidents all the time. But, it's not impossible that I could somehow steer this car back to my house and even though I'm this drunk, make it. So I know the evidence shows I could easily get into an accident or cause harm. But I hope and wish that won't happen, and I don't want to, stay at someone's house or call an Uber or something. So I'm just going to take my chances and drive. Now, again, this is a person who has evidence that getting behind the wheel is going to cause harm to people, but they're hoping and wishing that it won't. And so suppose that despite their hope, they actually do cause predictably, they cause an accident and hurt people or even themselves. In that case, everyone knows they did something wrong, right? They did something, the evidence showed it was dangerous, they did it anyway, and now there's harm. But suppose that by, happenstance, they do end up getting to their home without incident. They're drunk as hell, but just maybe the roads are kind of wide open in the middle of the night and no one was around. So they happen to get back home in one piece, no damage, no harm done. But was it really no foul, though? I mean, it still was foul, right? Even though we have that silly expression, no harm, no foul. In this case, nobody came to harm. But just like in the ship owner example, when the ship returns home safely, and you're like, yes, good luck. I'm so glad that worked out because it might not have. That doesn't excuse the moral basis of blaming the person for taking the action that exposed everyone to such danger. So the takeaway point from our author is, when you make a decision that's not based on the evidence and instead it's just based on hope and wishful thinking, you're doing something wrong right there. And the problem that he thinks we see with the ship owner is that he exhibits what is called a credulous character. So this is a little piece of terminology from the author. Credulous character. Credulous character is the type of person who will believe things that are not based on sufficient evidence. Okay, hopefully you can read it, but I'll say it too. It says, credulous character, definition, a person who will believe things that are not based on sufficient evidence. And that's what the that's what the ship owner is in the example given by the author. He's credulous because he believes the ship will return home safely, even though that's, not only is that not based on good evidence, there's no evidence that it will return home safely. it's actually running contrary to the evidence, because the evidence shows the exact opposite, that in all likelihood, in all probability, it will not return home safely if it's allowed to sail. So a little note on the word itself, credulous. Built into this is the root of credence or credibility. So a credulous person is someone who gives credibility to claims that don't deserve to be believed based on the evidence. So you're granting more credibility to statements and information than they really deserve based on the evidence that's out there. So it's a kind of close cousin of like a gullible type of person, or a person who ignores or just deviates from the evidence if it shows something that they don't want to be true. And the author, Clifford, is saying that it's wrong and it's bad to have a credulous character and to indulge it by forming beliefs that are not in line with the evidence. So that's what's wrong with the ship owner. The action of letting the ship sail was clearly wrong, because the action is what leads to the potential harm. But the belief that it could make it back safely, the belief is itself wrong, he says, because belief is what leads to the action. You know, you wouldn't let it sail unless you believed it could possibly work out. And he had no right to believe that based on the evidence that he had before him. So, Brandon, you mentioned it's kind of like confirmation bias. In a sense, it's a little bit like that. Confirmation bias is the concept of only seeking out friendly information that confirms what you already think is true, and ignoring all competing and contrary evidence. So like if a person believed in flat earth and they had confirmation bias, then they would go out online and like search the dark corners of the web for fellow travelers that have the same beliefs, and they would never expose themselves to the wealth of contrary evidence that shows this is false. So it's kind of like that, yeah, seeking only information that confirms your already established views. There's a slight difference between them, but it's a valid reference to bring that in. Okay, so let me read a little of the author's words. You can hear his discussion of the same idea, the same point. He says here, a ship owner was about to send to sea a ship. He knew that she was old, not well overbuilt even at first, and that she had seen many seas and often needed repairs. Doubts had been suggested to him that possibly she was not seaworthy. The doubts played on his mind, made him unhappy. He thought that perhaps he should have her thoroughly overhauled and refitted. Before the ship sailed, however, he succeeded in overcoming these sad reflections. He said to himself that she had gone safely through so many voyages and weathered so many storms that it was idle to suppose she would not come home safely from this trip also. He would put his trust in good luck, Providence, which could hardly fail to protect all these unhappy families that were leaving their fatherland to seek for better times elsewhere. He would dismiss from his mind all ungenerous suspicions about the honesty of builders and contractors. In such ways, he kind of convinced himself that the vessel was safe and seaworthy. He watched her depart with a light heart and benevolent wishes for the success of the ship. And when it went down in the middle of the ocean, he got insurance money and told no tales. Now, what should we say of him? Surely this, that he was guilty of the death of those men. It is admitted that he did this believing that it would work, but he had no right to believe on the evidence that was before him. He acquired his belief not by honestly earning it through a thorough and patient investigation, but by stifling his doubts. And although in the end, he may have felt so sure about it that he couldn't think otherwise, insofar as he had knowledge and willingly worked himself into that frame of mind, we must hold him responsible for it. And he says, let's alter the case a little. Now we get into the variation of the case. He says, suppose that the ship, after all, made the voyage safely. Would that diminish the guilt of the owner? No, not one bit. When an action is done, it is wrong or right forever. No accidental failure of its good or evil fruits could possibly change that. The man would not have been innocent. He would only have been not found out. The question of right or wrong has to do with the origin of his belief, not what happens based on it. And so he says whether the ship sinks or returns home safely, if he had a bunch of evidence that it was likely to sink, then we can't excuse his moral wrong decision just because of the favorable outcome that might have played out in one possible outcome of the scenario. Okay, so his takeaway then is don't have a credulous character. Don't just believe things that you hope are true if they are contradicted by the evidence that is out there. If you have a tendency to have a credulous character, you're going to do harm to yourself and to other people. So that's the next point, why it's bad to have a credulous character. And he kind of expands on the harm that can come from it. But I'll just give you a couple of examples, right? Say that, you don't want to believe that the coronavirus is so dangerous and harmful because it's scary, right? Because it means that you got to make significant changes to your lifestyle and it places uncertainty over the future. So you would rather believe that it's not a big deal, it's not that serious, people don't get it that easily, and if I get it, I probably won't die or get really sick. You know, you're hoping against hope that you don't face the worst consequences of the pandemic, even though you got a bunch of specialists that have dedicated their lives and professional careers to telling you to take all these precautions. So, you know, say that you go out, you don't mask up a lot of times, you go to social gatherings with a lot of people, and you're just hoping against hope that you don't face the worst outcomes, even though the evidence shows you something else. You might get lucky, but even if you do, that's not going to excuse all the blameworthiness of you taking these risks with your own health and with other people's health and safety as well. That's just one example. I don't know, suppose that you're in an evacuation zone where there's a bunch of fires that are spreading, and you have, you know, authorities, local authorities that have come out and issued an evacuation order to you and your family. They say these flames are approaching the hillside of your property. We need you to evacuate because we can't guarantee your safety if you remain there. You could get overtaken by the flames. Now you're thinking an evacuation is a hassle, and sometimes the flames will just miss your home and they'll go in a different direction. So even though you got all these professionals telling you that based on their professional judgment, the evidence shows you're likely to face danger, you just hope and wish that that won't happen. So you believe that it's not going to affect you based on not evidence, but just wishful thinking. Again, it could work out not in your favor, that's quite likely, but even if it does happen to work out in your favor, we won't say that you did nothing wrong by placing yourself and perhaps others in harm's way. So the credulous character is the kind of unifying theme in all these examples I'm giving you. A person is just giving credibility to something because they want it to be true, even though the evidence doesn't really show this to be any likely thing. So I'm going to mention then the two harms that he's talking about of having the credulous character, and that kind of serves as his major reasons why the reader of the paper should not foster this this habit of mind. So two harms of having a credulous character. So there is self-harm and social harm. The self-harm that comes from having a credulous character is it makes you a poor judge of facts. It makes you a very poor judge of what's true and false, and that's bound to hurt you. So incapable of facing uncomfortable truths. Let me just give a little extra space. So one thing that having a credulous character, one way it harms you is by weakening and destroying your powers of judgment. Okay, so a person that has a credulous character that just believes whatever they want to be true or whatever they hope is true, regardless of what the real evidence shows, this person's not a good judge of what's true and false, because if something that is not so nice or favorable looks like it's true based on the evidence, they can't bring themselves to accept it. And so they'll invent a rationalization as to why the evidence is misleading or as to why there's some kind of mysterious or just completely made up evidence towards the contrary. You want to be a person that's actually capable of weighing evidence and coming to the right conclusions of what's true and false, even if sometimes you realize that the facts at hand are not suitable to your self-interest. It's better for you to be able to face the uncomfortable realities and truths than to somehow try to ignore them or pretend that they aren't there. You know, like if a doctor said to you, look, this is going to be a tough thing for you, but I have to tell you that our tests are showing that you've got like a diagnosis of cancer, and so here's the course of treatment that we are recommending. And you say, oh no, I can't have cancer. I'm going to seek a second, third, fourth opinion, and I don't like the treatment methods, so I'm going to choose to go with methods of treatment that are not scientifically validated because that's more comfortable to my psyche and to my sense of security and safety. Throughout that whole process, you're trying to avoid the harsh reality, but you're also not taking actions that would more effectively treat the problem, and so you're actually putting yourself in a worse condition. Right? It's like the person that refuses to evacuate based on hope and wishful thinking. It may make them feel a little bit more content and at ease, blocking out the belief that they're in mortal danger right now of a fire, because that's a scary thing to think about. But wouldn't they be better off coming to the rational conclusion and taking the responsible actions instead of trying to secure themselves against the awareness of something dangerous or bad, which in the end is just going to bite them worse when they have to face the consequences of ignoring the facts. So you don't want to be a person that can't follow the evidence wherever it leads, even if it leads in a direction that you would have preferred it not to. You want to be able to correctly draw conclusions from evidence, and having a credulous character always gets in the way of that, because every time the conclusion is something you'd hope not to happen, you refuse to accept it, okay? So that's the self-harm, and then the social harm aspect just kind of piggybacks on that. So it's just the same thing, except it just spreads it to other people. So the social harm is that you will spread this tendency to other people who you have an influence over. It says social harm, that is, you will spread the habit to other people that are influenced by you. So the harm doesn't just stop with you. That's one aspect of this paper that I find a little interesting, because some people might say, you know, well, it's just my business, isn't it? If I'm a gullible, credulous person, don't tell me not to do it. If I'm going to do it and I suffer losses and harms, then those are costs that are just being borne by me. And nobody has a right to tell me to be more patient, careful, and weigh evidence when I believe things. It's my choice if I want to believe things with no good evidence, because that's just the way I want to live. But this author is saying it's not really just a personal thing. It has a social consequence also. So it's really not just your own business, basically, because you're a part of the world, and the way that you act, even if you think you have no huge sphere of influence, it does have some degree of influence over at least some limited number of people within your circle of acquaintance. Everybody has like friends, parents, siblings, classmates, etc. And we all observe each other. And so imagine if you had like a little sibling that's looking up to you as an example of a role model, and they see that when you form your beliefs, you just ignore evidence sometimes and believe whatever you really hope is the case. This person looking up to you then will say, well, that's the example of good intellectual behavior, and I want to copy that and mirror that. And so then they adopt the same tendency. And then it transmits around like a disease. So people with whom they interact and have influence take on the same mental habits. After a while, if there's no check against this tendency to have this credulous way of forming beliefs, then pretty soon everyone loses focus on the connection between evidence and truth and belief. And we live in a world where people are just running around believing whatever they want without any consideration of evidence. And that's not the kind of world you want to live in. You don't want to go and be accused of a crime and then look at a panel of jurors that are sitting there like, how do I vote? I'm going to just vote on what's popular. I'm not going to look at the evidence. Or you don't want to have like a doctor that says, you know, maybe you have cancer, but let's look at, you know, the bright side. Let's do a bunch more tests and try and prove that that's not the case. Meanwhile, you're running out of precious time to take an aggressive course of treatment. So you want to live in a world where people deliver facts based on rational consideration of evidence. And you're helping to destroy that kind of world if you harbor the credulous character and then spread the tendency to other people who will then do the same thing in turn. Clifford mentions that, you know, some people think it's only people in high positions of authority who have an obligation to weigh evidence and believe on the evidence and not otherwise. Like maybe presidents, prime ministers, you know, officers. There's a lot of lives and money and stuff on the line depending on what decisions they make. But he says not just those people, it's everyday people like us too, because each one of us has at least some degree of social influence. And even if it's small, if you multiply that by the millions and billions of people that we are, then it adds up in the big picture. So I'll read that a little bit more. He says, no man holding a strong belief on one side of a question can investigate it with such fairness and completeness as if he were really endowed and unbiased, so that the existence of a belief not founded on fair inquiry does not fit a man for the performance of his duties. Nor is it a belief at all which has not got some influence on the actions of him who holds it. He who truly believes that which prompts him to an action has looked upon the action and committed it already in his heart. If a belief is not realized immediately in open deeds, it is stored up for the guidance of the future, It goes to make a part of that aggregate of beliefs, which is the link between sensation and action at every moment of our lives. No real belief, however trifling and fragmentary it may seem, is ever truly insignificant. It prepares us to receive more of its like, confirms those which resembled it before, and weakens others. So it gradually lays a stealthy train in our innermost thoughts, which may someday explode into overt action and leave its stamp upon our character forever. So you might think that, well, in the ship owner case, it's important for him to weigh evidence carefully because this is a life and death matter. If he's wrong about his choice, people can die on the ship. So in my limited daily circumstances, I don't have the kind of stakes that the ship owner faces. So aren't I permitted to form beliefs without attention to evidence if there's nobody's life or well-being at risk? And he says in this passage that no, because it's a habit of belief formation, and even if it seems innocent and innocuous enough in one case, that same habit will then reveal itself again in a more important case later, where there are more things on the line. So, it starts off with you just saying, hey, I don't want to believe that, I'm sick today, and I'm going to soldier through it. And then, it kind of can build from there, and eventually you might have a very important decision where you will ignore the evidence and just go with what you hope instead, where the consequences matter a lot more. So he says, don't kind of lull yourself into a false sense of security thinking that sometimes I can just form silly beliefs with no good evidence behind them because it doesn't really matter and there's no stakes involved. But he's saying you'd be a fool to do that because that habit is going to be carried with you even through to the weightier and more consequential decisions that you will have. And then he also says this about the influence that it has on others. He says, no man's belief is a private matter which concerns only him. Our lives are guided by the general conception of the course of things which was created by society for social purposes. So our words, phrases, forms, and processes of thought are common property passed down from age to age, which every succeeding generation inherits as a deposit from the previous one. Into this, for good or ill, is woven every belief of every man who has speech of his fellows. So he says you kind of wield this awesome power to either pass on a good example of responsible belief formation to other people that are influenced by you, or you can instead pass on the unhelpful and dangerous example of having a credulous character. So you kind of, in a way, help shape the world of which you're a part by passing along either a good or a poor intellectual example for other people to follow. So in the end, then, that's kind of his conclusion. Don't have a credulous character. Don't believe things unless the evidence backs them up to a sufficient degree. But if you believe things based merely on hope, wish, especially if it's contradicted by evidence, that's not okay. That's not right. It's not okay for the ship owner to do it. And he also is claiming that it's not okay for people to do such things in more limited daily circumstances, which may appear innocent enough, but which actually do have these possible harmful consequences lying out in the future. So in the end, how can this be seen as an objection to Pascal? I want us to make sure not to lose focus on that, because first essay prompt says to write on those two topics, but also to give two objections to each. So this is one possible form of objection to Pascal's wager, and here's how it is. When Pascal says, you ought to go ahead and believe in God, does he say, because I can prove it and because here's a bunch of evidence that shows that it's true? No. In fact, to the contrary, Pascal clearly says that there's no way to prove it and there's no evidence that could ever be made available that could prove or disprove that God exists. So why then does Pascal say that you should believe? Not based on evidence, but rather because of the hope that if you are correct, it would be to your benefit. And that's kind of like the ship owner. The ship owner doesn't have any evidence that the ship will sail successfully home. In fact, to the contrary, the evidence shows that it probably won't. But he chooses to believe it because he hopes that he'll stand to benefit if his hope turns out true. So if it was wrong for the ship owner to believe this thing contrary to evidence, just on the hoped for outcome, then it would also be wrong to believe in God, not because evidence shows that he exists, but rather because of the hoped for benefit of being right in case you are. So, he doesn't come right out and directly say, and this is against Pascal, and this is against the belief in God without better evidence. But he does have some suggestive quotes that indicate that he's thinking of such things. And on page 53, there's this one. It says, famous quote too, "It is wrong always, everywhere, for anyone to believe anything without sufficient evidence." So that's like a famous quote from this paper. That's a good takeaway on page 53. And right after that, he says this: "If a man, holding a belief which he was taught in childhood or persuaded of afterwards, keeps down and pushes away any doubts that arise about it in his mind, purposely avoids the reading of books and the company of men that call in question or discuss it, and regards as impious those questions which cannot easily be asked without disturbing it. Impious is like a religious word, so this kind of indicates that that's what he's thinking. He says, if that's the case, then the life of that man is one long sin against mankind. And that's also, I think, an ironic and clever use of diction, because sin is another religious term, but he's kind of turning it on its head, saying that if you believe things without evidence, your whole life is kind of like a sin against your fellow man. So, you know, I think that in the end, his criticism is not necessarily of the belief in God per se, but in the way of believing in God that is advised by Pascal, to believe just based on hope of being correct, rather than based on evidence or like rational argument. But there you have it. That's one way of resisting Pascal. Pascal says, believe in God. There's no evidence of this, but don't you hope you're correct? And it would not be so nice if you didn't believe and you were incorrect. But this is rather trying to force upon you a belief based on the desired outcome rather than the evidence itself. And so he thinks he can get us to agree that that's a bad basis for belief through the consideration of his examples and then the commentary that he follows it with. So hopefully that's kind of clear. There's one more critic or objection to Pascal's wager that's also listed on the schedule for this week. And, you know, as we're running lower on time for today, I'll definitely make sure we cover all of it on Thursday. But I guess I could at least say a few things about it to get this in your mind and get the conversation started. So the next author, and this is one of the last ones on philosophy of religion, is Robert McKim. And his paper is from 2001 called The Hiddenness of God. Robert McKim, American philosopher of the current day, pretty much, and yeah, his essay is called The Hiddenness of God. So the title kind of gives you a hint as to what this essay is about. It's about the question of what should we think concerning the fact that God is hidden. Hidden meaning you can't just perceive God with the five senses like you could perceive other things like me or you. Like for you to know that I exist, Dr. Vulich, you don't have to come up with a philosophical argument. You're just looking at me right now, and so you can clearly see my face, hear my voice. So my presence as a thing that exists, it really can't be questioned because it's easy to verify through the ordinary five senses that you have. But with God, we're kind of left to question, debate, and wonder a little bit as to whether he exists. Many people believe just based on faith, and the reason is because there's not obvious evidence. It's not like you just look up and he's like, oh, there he is. No question, just right there. You can see him hanging in the sky or whatever. So the hiddenness of God is one powerful reason that some people just have skepticism and doubt as to whether he exists. For some people, the fact that God appears to be hidden from the five senses just means that there's no such thing. Seeing is believing or whatever. And if you can't see something, feel, taste, touch, hear, or whatever with any of the five senses, then some people will say, I just don't think there is any such thing. So the author McKim wants to explore what is the significance of God being hidden in terms of how rational our belief in God might be. But to get us to his ultimate conclusions, he, as many philosophers do, asks us to think of a hypothetical scenario, okay? So his scenario is, it's almost like a storybook kind of scenario, highly detailed, and therefore it would make better sense for me to just kind of talk you through major points of it instead of writing an exhaustive list of notes. So just try your best to focus on some of the aspects of this little narrative I'm about to give you, okay? So like, once upon a time, pretend there was this island, all right? And there's people that live on the island. So there's a whole civilization of island dwellers. Well, on this given island, let's say there's never been any contact from any outsiders to the island. So the people who live there, as far as they know, this island, it could be the whole world of human civilization. None of the people living there have ever ventured off of it. And in all recorded memory, no one from outside of the island has arrived to it. So there's people living there and they have their human civilization, but isolated as they are from outside contact, for all they know, this is the whole world of humans. Okay, but there's some rumors and myths, legends that exist on the island that are told by some of the elders of the community. And these elders, some of them speak to these accounts of how the island they're on used to be part of a bigger empire. So they say in the days of old, way back, this was not isolated. It was like one part of an archipelago or whatever of islands that were all connected, and they were formed together as an empire. So this is the legendary stories of the old folks, that this used to be way back one island that was part of a larger empire. And they said that this large empire was ruled by a great and good emperor who kind of just was who presided over the entire constellation of islands, of which this was one part. All right, so those are the rumors and myths. If you're following the story so far, here's all that I've told you. There's an island isolated from outside contact, believed to be self-contained from any others. But some of the elders do tell stories about how a long time ago it was part of a bigger empire ruled by a great emperor. Now, other members of the community, when they hear these legends from the older folks, not all of them know what to think. Some agree with it, some don't. So it's kind of shrouded in like cultural debate, whether they're legends or real facts. But okay, one day then something happens on the island, which is very, very notable and different. They start to see ships appearing and coming in from the ocean towards the beach. So obviously that's a huge moment for them because, as I was telling you, in all of their historical memory, apart from some of these vague legends, there never been any outside contact. So you got a group of people that are from the island gathering at the beach, awaiting the arrival of the incoming ships. So one of the ships now anchors down, and off the ship comes some people, and they're speaking now to a gathered, assembled crowd of island dwellers. So one of those guys from the ship now speaks, and he says, "Hello, everybody. I'm glad that you guys are here because we've come to you with a message. We've been sent to you all because we understand that you've heard some legends from your elders. We know that you guys have heard from them that this island used to be part of a very big empire, and many of you are not sure whether these stories are true or false, but we're here to tell you that we can confirm this is true. You are part of a great big empire, and this is just one small part of it. We're here to announce this to you guys and notify you that that is all true, in fact. And there was another part of the legend where you guys were told that it was ruled by a great and good benevolent emperor. And we're also here to tell you that that's true. In fact, the emperor is the one who sent us. So we're messengers from the emperor, your emperor, actually. And why he sent us was he wanted us to deliver this message that you're part of the empire, he's your emperor, and he kind of wants to reclaim this land for the empire. So he's asking us to come and request from all of you your submission and obedience to him. He wants to let you know he's your emperor, and so therefore you have to willfully submit to his rule. So that's why we're here. You guys heard me. It's to tell you that the legends are true. This is part of a big empire. There is a great emperor. And by the way, he sent us to you to ask for your fidelity to him. But one more little plot twist. The emperor, we call him the hidden emperor. He's saying this to all the people there. The hidden emperor, guys. So why do you think they call him the hidden emperor? Anybody here in the chat have a guess? What could be the reason why the so-called great emperor from the legends of old is known, aka as the hidden emperor? What do you think is the reason if you're following the larger narrative? Well, you say he ain't real, Jerry, but that's maybe a couple steps down the line. Let's get there slower than that. What would be the reason that, I mean, the messengers say he's real. Yeah, so good, because he's never shown himself. He's not perceptible, and they're telling that to the gathered crowd. They say, well, he's the emperor, right? But he's the hidden emperor, and the reason we call him that is because no matter what, he never shows himself. Like, he will not present himself to anybody. Sight, taste, touch, hearing, smell. He's totally absent from the five senses. But look, he's powerful. He's awesome. He could be invisible. He could read people's minds. He could be in more than one place at a time. He could teleport. He won't show himself to even his most devoted followers like us. But we know he exists, and we're sending this message to you. Anyway, we don't have all day. So you heard our question, right? What is it going to be? Loyalty to the hidden emperor or no? Because then we can decide what to do next. Now, a buzz is going through the crowd. And you got people in there that are kind of like, is this true? Is this false? It's a weird thing. And discussion ensues from certain members of the crowd. And that's where we'll pick up, I guess, on Thursday. Basically, you got one guy that's going to come forward and be like, hold on a minute. There's no emperor. These people are just making stuff up, or they're deluded, because if we can't see or perceive him in any of the ways that normal people can be perceived, what reason is there to think he's real? I mean, there must not be an emperor. That's what one guy says. Then another person steps forward and says, I don't know, though. Maybe he just wants to give us a choice about whether to believe. He kind of wants to test to see whether we'll decide on our own. And then there's kind of like a moderate in between those two. And so these are really obviously like metaphors for the real question that we're pursuing, which is whether God exists and what we should make of his hiddenness. And the author is going to draw conclusions from here, but I've set us up to at least get into the last part of the paper on Thursday. So I guess for now, anyways, have a great day, everybody. I'll be in touch, obviously, over email, and tomorrow I have my normal office hours. But until Thursday, I guess, just have a great day. And thanks again for your attendance and everything else. So I'll see you guys then back on Thursday. Let me know if everyone's good in the chat, and then I'll just sign off. Still with me? Can hear and see me? Okay, perfect, guys. Well, thanks so much again. Have a great one, and we'll be in touch in a few days. Bye-bye. Thank you.